Hello, Get Your Best Chapter, where I chat with amazing women to get inspired and learn and get wisdom about the journeys that we're on, especially the journeys that we're on through divorce and job loss. And today I have a really amazing guest. Her name is Karen Omond, and she's going to talk a little bit about what she does. But I'm really, really excited about this conversation. I met Karen a few months ago. She's doing amazing work, and I'm really looking forward to all the wisdom and guidance that she's going to provide us. So, Karen, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to you quickly. Just if you could introduce yourself to the audience, what it is that you do, and how you help people that are going through divorce.
So I'm a thanatologist, which is a very rare degree. I got at University of Western here in Ontario. And so the whole study is grief, loss, and bereavement. So I started my career off doing palliative work at the hospital. I did volunteer work. And then I slowly switched over to bereavement as I lost both my parents early, like young in life. And I said, this is my calling. I'm going to do death loss. But then I started going through my own divorce, and I went to a legal workshop before I got divorced. And I said to the lawyer, the lawyers asked, Karen, what are you doing? I said, I'm studying thanatology. And I said, that's grief. And they said, oh my goodness, Karen, there's so much grief in divorce that goes unrecognized. And they said they've had clients in their offices crying, like just devastated, right? And so that kind of tweaked my interest. And then, over time, I started thinking maybe there's something more here. So then I started 3 years ago, Divorce Workshop. And we've kind of been starting to focus on all aspects of divorce. But my love and my passion that I want people to recognize is that there is a lot of grief in divorce. And it's almost like the relationship has died. And it's not talked about a lot. And in my own divorce story, I was with a challenging person, and I decided to leave. And even for me, who was studying thanatology, I was grieving, and I was like, why am I grieving when I want this marriage to end? But it's so many multifaceted, right? Like there's so many reasons why I was, and we can go in that later. But it all made sense now, but looking back, I was kind of confused. And and I think, as you said, before, when we were talking before, there's not a lot of support. So that's kind of another reasons why I have this passion to help divorcing people, because it can feel very alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hear that a lot from women that they feel like they're the only ones going through something. They feel really isolated. They tell me a lot that they don't want to burden their friends and family with whatever they're going through because they don't maybe feel understood, or they don't, or maybe their friends and family don't know how to support them. But, you know, like you and I were talking about before, there are resources available. There's lots of support. So really, our mission, part of our mission is to increase that awareness for
Hmm.
people that there is a lot of support. Now, before I met you, I had actually never heard of something called a
Hmm.
thanatologist.
Hmm.
So that is so fascinating to me. And you're so right that there is, I mean, obviously grief is a part of any loss, but you're right. We don't really associate that with divorce. We think it's, we talk about it as a failed marriage, or we talk about it as something's broken and we just need to move forward and get over it and all these types of things. And so, can you get into like what grief actually is and how we experience grief in divorce?
Well, grief is so unique to everybody. So what you went through with your divorce could be different than what I went through feeling wise, right? So it is that's a huge question, right? But you can feel anyway from, so go just a thing I want to say to you guys. So I had a widow in about a year ago, and her sister had gone through a divorce, and she was a widow. And I've been working with her for a while. And she said to me, she says, Karen, my sister is going through a divorce. And she said to me, it feels like I have the same symptoms as you do.
Mm.
Slightly different, but the similar symptoms. And a lot of people think, they're not going to have the same symptoms of a death loss. Now, there is a difference slightly, But the thing is, though, you can have the same type of symptoms, like emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral, that you would when you have experienced a death loss. But it's never, as you said, people don't really kind of put it together that, we're also overwhelmed with so many things when we're going through our divorces. We don't think, well, maybe I'm really angry, not just because I'm angry with the situation, but I'm also angry because I'm grieving. So grief can show up multiple ways, right? Like I've had clients that have had stomach aches and had headaches and they're not sleeping. And it is because of all the stress. But sometimes when you get to the core of it, it's also because their foundation of their life is gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you wanted the divorce, there's still a lot to get through. And I also want to mention to everybody is this, we call these secondary losses. So we have the divorce and you may get some support with the divorce, but a lot of people forget all the other things that come, which can come 6 months, 9 months, 5 years from now. They're called secondary losses, right? So you may, first of all, a lot of people have to sell their house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you put 20 years into this house. And I know it's a material thing, but it is something that, I've had people say, I really miss my house, right? My kids were born there. And I can't, I just couldn't sustain it myself, right? Or they don't get to see their kids during certain holidays because now we're co-parenting and we're sharing. I had one client, it was really hard for her. We had to work through a lot because she's like, I'm used to having my kids all the time in certain holiday seasons, or your identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
That's the big
huge.
one.
The big one, right? Who are you now, right? So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I could go on about these losses, but it can make these secondary losses can go on for quite a while. And another thing with these secondary losses, Vera, is they're not acknowledged by many,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like society doesn't acknowledge these losses, right? Like, so you're not
Mm-hmm.
really getting the support that you really need for everything else that you've lost, right? So,
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because I talk about that a lot with my clients as well, but I've never used that terminology as secondary losses because there is so much that we lose. Something that comes to mind too is we lose a lot of our friendship circle, right? Because we used to have couple friends or friends that we used to do things together. And I think inevitably it happens where we lose some of our friendships. And that's another really huge loss because, again, some of your support system goes along with that, or your feeling of being supported goes along with that, right?
so sorry to interrupt, but what is the real difference? Like, I've dealt with a lot of widows and widowers, and they're the same way. Okay. So when they
Mm-hmm.
become a widow or a widower, friendships shift and change too, right? And I remember for me, I went up north after I separated with my girls and my dog. And we went up north,
Mm-hmm.
and my sisters were with their husbands and their kids. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a third wheel, like a
Mm-hmm.
fifth wheel, where I was
Yeah.
like a fifth wheel going, this would be how my widowers and widows are feeling. You feel kind of like, you know, strange. I remember feeling this is kind of strange, like I'm not a unit anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
that was just another thing I wanted to mention because it kind of feels like just another form of loss, right? Another feeling that I comparable to the grievers that I see on the death side.
Well, it's the identity piece, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
were a wife or you were a spouse, and now all of a sudden you're not that. You're an ex-wife, or you're a divorcee, or all of a sudden it's like you're not who you were for however many years that you were married. Like you're not part of that unit anymore. And so it does feel like you're floating around a little bit in terms of who am I, right? How can I embrace this new me? And what does that mean for my relationships? What does that mean for what I call myself or how I identify? So that whole identity piece is so big, and I know both you and I work with clients through that, like reinventing your
Mm-hmm.
identity or recreating or reclaiming. I hear that a
Mm-hmm.
lot too. Like I
Mm-hmm.
lost myself. That's the other loss, right? Like I lost myself in this relationship. I know that's what happened to me. Like I lost who I was,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was going through the divorce, I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's reclaiming that, who am I at the core as a person, as a whole person, and moving through that along with moving through
Mhm.
the grief. I do have a question about the grief process because, I think we were maybe taught, I don't know if this is correct or incorrect, but there's a process through grief. And I always like to say, yes, but the process is it's different for each person and it's not linear.
Mhm.
Like it's not like you go from this emotion and then you clear that out and you go the next emotion, you clear that out. Can you explain a little bit about is there a process or how does it actually move through you this grief?
Well, I want to say we've all heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? That was by our pioneer in my field, Kubler-Ross, and she is one of the pioneers of bereavement studies. But there is no, as you said, there's no stages. I remember for myself, one day I'd feel relief. The next day I was on the floor crying. The next day I was angry, right? So there's no 5 stages, right? It's more of an integration, and it can come in major waves. As I said to you, my wave, the first couple of weeks, I was like, yes, it feels so much better. And then reality kind of sets in and you go, whoa, this is my new reality, right? Okay, I wanted this. Okay, I got a lot of work to do, right? And also another thing that happens with grievers a lot is they avoid.
Mm,
And when they avoid, they're not, we would call it, they're not leaning into it, right? So they're
mm,
not leaning into the grief, allowing the grief to come up, and then they're pushing it down. So there's a lot of that
mm.
that happens to death and non-death losses, right? They just kind of shove it down because it's easier. We don't want to be, we don't like pain. We do,
Yeah.
we our brains don't like pain. We don't like confusion. And it makes sense that we kind of like, I'm just going to avoid this. The problem is with grief of any loss is it's going to come out in other ways. So maybe you're
Mhm,
holding too tight on the court stuff, not because it's a really bad divorce. Maybe you're just so angry that they left you, right?
mhm,
You know what I mean? Like there's some behaviors that can be, like I'm going to get back at you because da 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 da. But it really
mhm,
is you're just really really like sad. I know I had one other client that it wasn't so much that he left her, it was the fact that she was so angry.
mm.
How you left me and you hurt me and all my future dreams. I'm sure you've heard that. We were supposed to retire in Florida. We were supposed, you know what I mean? We were supposed
Right,
to do this.
right.
I had one client said they were supposed, my grandchildren and us, we were all going to be swimming in our pool, and now I'm in a
Mhm,
townhouse. So there's a
mhm.
lot of
You lose your dreams and your plans,
mm,
right? Another form of loss is that
another.
you're right. We were dreaming, we were planning, we were saving up for this thing, we were
Mhm,
talking about it, and all of a sudden that's lost, right?
mhm.
Or changed in some way.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's all very, very unique, right? Like, so how it shows up for you in the same way it show up for me,
Mhm,
and that's okay. And a lot of work that I do with divorcing clients too is a lot of psychoeducation, because they're
mhm,
really not aware that this could be what they're actually feeling. And I want to make it clear, like, it doesn't have to be that you were left or it was mutual. It was,
right.
I left and I was grieving because I was grieving also the time I put 20
Mhm,
years into this marriage, right? Like that,
mm, mhm,
think about that. Like that is 20 years of my prime time, right? Like,
mhm,
like 20s to 40s, right? And another thing I want to point out is we have to grieve who we were married to.
mm,
So if
mhm.
you were married to somebody that was challenging or difficult,
Right.
acceptance of that is also really important, and that takes a lot of
Mhm.
time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What would you say in terms I know this is a big topic, but in
Mhm.
terms of feeling the pain of grief, and I agree, we do ignore it, we push it down, we we wanna make it go away, but it does manifest itself in other ways, whether it's
Mhm.
physical
Yep.
ailments or whether it's, like you said, behavioral kind of things that come up that aren't
See?
appropriate or how we wanna
Yep.
be, but how do you suggest that people sit with those feelings and let those feelings come up so that you can actually process them through your body or your mind?
So in grieving world, we don't it's so, as I said many times already, unique. So say for you, you like to walk.
Mm.
So that would be, we call it more of an instrumental. So you need to, like, I got to pound pavement, right? I'm just going to walk. I'm going to walk, walk, walk.
Mm.
Or at the same time, you can be intuitive. And intuitive is I'm going to cry, or I'm going to isolate and get depressed, or and normally people sway between intuitive and instrumental. And so for me personally, walking and crying. So I was moving my body and I was crying. Instrumental is also thinking things through, right? So you're thinking like practically thinking. Like a lot of, if I'm gonna be, I don't mean to be gender stereotype, but a lot of men are more instrumental, and a lot of women are intuitive. But we do tend to cross over, right? So I could say to you, oh, Vera, do narrative therapy. I have exercises for narrative therapy. Let's do that. And you're going to say, oh yes, that's great. And I can say to another client, okay, I'd like you. They're like, no, I don't think so. So you have to navigate that too. So I'll try to recommend, well, maybe go walk in nature, or another one, maybe sit and meditate, or like it's so different for everybody. But they have to kind of, and unless they've been through grief before, which a lot of us have, you have to figure out what worked for you before, even for a death loss, and put it in toward the grief with divorce. The problem with divorce is, it's there's so many things hitting at you at one time, right? So back to self-care, right? And self-compassion and stuff. But there is so many, like, what else do I do? I have other tools. Like I'll give them exercises to figure out their support system, because if you don't have the right support system, then that can be really frustrating too. I call an exercise I have in our workbook, it's called the Wild UN, and they have to figure out which support comes, like the ones that really are supportive, the ones that aren't, the ones that are distractors and stuff, because that'll all help them navigate. Another thing is in the Thanatology world, it's very, very important for their support systems. So we look at all types of support systems. What are they? What's your peer support like? As we talked about, we know that friends shift, families shift, right? We don't have the same family anymore. So peers would be really good. Peers who have been through divorce, it's really good. Like, it's good camaraderie, right? Also family and friends. But as I said, the exercise I have, which ones are good for you? Like which family and friends are good? Professionals like you, like me, like others, right? Maybe you need professionals, and your lawyer or your mediator, whatever. And then yourself. You need to really, really, really work on yourself. So it shows up in many different ways. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm just on the top of my head thinking.
No, it does, because what I'm hearing is that it is unique to every person, and you need to allow and really listen to yourself as to what it is that's going to work for you, as opposed to just ignoring it and saying, I'm not going to do anything. Right. So there needs to be action that's taken, and whether that's going for a walk or working out, or whether it's sitting in meditation, like figuring out what that works. And I think sometimes it's also asking for the help. Like you said, we need coaches, right? We need therapists. We need other people in our community, different pockets of community that are supporting us in different ways. Because even if you have gone through a loss prior, you still don't maybe understand all the tools. So having someone that can look at things objectively, they're in your corner, like you and I, we're in our client's corner, we're supporting them, but we're also not emotionally necessarily invested in that. So we can look at it and say, maybe I invite you to try this particular tool, or, have you considered trying this? And maybe it's just something they haven't even thought about. So asking for help and being open to those resources, those tools, those strategies, and being open to trying them out. Because, a lot of times, and maybe you hear this too, like people will say to me, no, I'm not a journaler, or I'm not a meditator. I can't sit quietly. And it's like, well, what if you just tried it for 2 minutes, once a day for the next week, and just see? And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. We'll try something different. But a lot of times people are really surprised at what does work for them, and once they open themselves up to different tools and strategies, right? So I think it's giving yourself permission to do that, and also knowing that you need to do something.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? And awareness, right? Half the time is when I'll talk to them, they'll be like, this sounds like grief, and they're like, oh. I did a support group a couple of weeks ago, and there was like 6 of them, and they were so sad. But they didn't even connect it together, right? And I said to them at the end of it, I said, there's a lot of grief here that does not get recognized, right? There's a lot of loss. And they're like, oh, yeah. And I think that's another thing. Like I'm 6 years ago was my divorce. I didn't have, I didn't know any of what we know, like what, there's no support systems. And I knew how important it was. I couldn't find anything, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think if we do the right support systems, we have the right tools, we can really do much better, right? Like we can really navigate through this better than
Absolutely.
better than I did.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, maybe now's a good time just to kind of put in a little plug for both of us. I mean,
Hmm.
if people go to my website, practicalwisdomcoaching.ca, I'm always hosting free workshops or master classes or other resources for women to join and attend. What about you? What it is that you do, specifically? I know you have your workshops as well, but maybe
Hmm.
explain a little bit, how it is that you support and what tools you provide.
So we are finishing our divorce workbook, which has been a 2-year project. And
Amazing. Amazing.
it's, yeah, I'll send you a copy, Vera. It's been our heart and soul just to try to get out. It's 6 units. It's a foundational thing of divorce. So it's affordable. It's for everybody. It's like insights, legal information, emotions, financial information, co-parenting information, because I had no idea how to co-parent, even though I came from a child of divorce, and then recovery. And um, it's really, really, it's engaging. It's pictures, it's tests, self-test, lots of resources. So we're super excited about that. That'll be coming out probably in June. And I do a lot of people that are kind of emotionally stuck.
Mm,
That I tell other divorce coaches, if that you're finding somebody that that is heavy in grief or emotions, send them my way. That's kind of my expertise, right? Because I had a couple of years ago, I was doing a presentation for widows and widowers at one of the residential, and during COVID, and one of the ladies gets on and she said she was tearing up, and I thought, okay, she goes, no, it's because of my divorce. I've never dealt with it.
mm,
And I don't, I know some people out there, I've seen a few myself that have gotten quite stuck and not being able to let go or process what we need to them to do. In grief, we don't call it closure, we call it integration. So I would like them to
mm.
integrate it, and that takes time. And so I do that, and then we have some resources on the website as well. And Kirk, my co-partner, also my new partner of 6 years, he does men coaching because
Mhm.
there has been some need for some men to have some divorce coaching too. Because
100%.
yeah,
100%. We all need coaching, right?
yeah. So he's been helping with the men with divorce coaching as well. So
Oh,
that's in a
amazing.
nutshell as what I do. And I still do grief work at a boutique down here in Ontario, and as well as online. So
Fantastic. Well, and your website is divorceworkshop.ca, so I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. So go check that out. Go check out Karen's work. Amazing work. I guess to recap, what I'm really hearing is that we need to acknowledge that divorce is associated with grief. Like we're grieving through a
mhm,
divorce, and that there are lots of emotions that come up, and that we do need to acknowledge that we're going through a really really challenging loss, and it can be as severe as going through a
a death
death
loss.
loss,
Yeah.
right?
Some of
And
them,
so
yeah.
acknowledging that,
Yeah,
yeah, so
some of them,
acknowledging that.
sorry.
No, and just again that everyone's journey is unique, but that there are so many tools and resources available. So be open to that. Know that those emotions are perfectly healthy and necessary to feel those emotions in order for us to move forward. And like you said, integrate them. I
Mhm,
like that word. I'm going to start using that
mhm,
as opposed to closure, because you're right. We need to learn how to live with this shift in our lives.
mhm.
It's never going to go away. It's impacted our life for the rest of our life. And how do we integrate that in a healthy way as we move forward through life, right?
Yeah, that's really, really important. Closures is not a word I use. We
Mhm.
integrate, we have to rebuild our life. And another thing I want to mention before we go is you have to start, as you know very well, you have to start making meaning. So you have to
Mhm.
start making meaning again. And that's one of the key concepts in Thanatology. Accept the reality that this is your life right now. That takes time and process it. And then you have to start making meaning. And that is what you've done. It's what I've done. It's what all of everybody out there that's going through divorce, they can do it too in their own way. Everyone's unique to what makes meaning for them.
And that provides optimism, right? That at the
Mhm.
end of it, at the kind of it, as you get through the acute part and as you learn to integrate all these feelings and this big shift into your life, and as you reclaim your identity, there is meaning there is
Mhm.
meaning, there's purpose, there's a gift
Mhm.
in all this. And I think that is such a beautiful thing to know in your heart, even if you're not seeing it right now in your journey, to know that there is meaning. There's definitely a light there that will shine and provide you with that meaning. So thank you so much for
Mhm.
bringing that up, and thank you so much for the work that you do, the beautiful work that you do with your
Mm.
clients around grief and divorce. I really acknowledge you for that. And thank you so much for coming onto my show today and sharing all about grief and some ways that we can sit with our emotions and really rebuild our life after this
Mhm.
major life shift. So thank you so much, Karen.
Well, thank you for having me and bringing awareness to grief in divorce. It's really important work. And thank you for all the work you do as well.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks.